Good morning, everyone. Doing a little YouTube live question and answer session. Retiring soon and will work for free for you. I want to retire soon as well. I did. I did apply. Yes, okay, so the question is, did I apply for the White House press badge? I did. I went to the whitehouse.gov and there's a link on there and I applied. I can tell you right now, they're not giving me a press pass. Because, they're going to look at all of my content. They wanted my usernames for all my socials. And, yeah. They're not going to pick me. I'm just telling you, it's not going to happen. You're welcome, Kent. Thank you, everyone, for following. If you're not following me and you've stumbled in here, please subscribe to my channel. I'm migrating here, moving here. This is going to be my main platform where I post content. There's a podcast coming, and it's not going to just be an oil and gas podcast. It is going to be a total energy podcast, but it's not just going to be an oil and gas podcast. It'll be anyway, I'm working on that. I am on Substack. I've written some pieces, some articles on Substack, and I also post normal content, regular content there now that they have the notes feature in Substack. So Substack is almost transforming into like a more typical type of social media platform. It's changed a lot. You can do lives on there, and so I am on Substack. Okay, let's get to some questions. How quickly will an increase in cost in Canadian due to tariffs be reflected at the pump? Immediately. And understand, and here's why I say this. Anytime anything happens that relates to energy, the price at the pump goes up within seconds, right? We've all seen this. And then when everything settles down, it takes a long time for the prices to come back down. So simply by instituting those tariffs, the gas prices, mostly in the Midwest, we're talking about Ohio, the upper Midwest area, definitely those places will see gas prices increase immediately. And it is nearly impossible to come up with the number. I've always said about 50 cents, and all of the experts and analysts and the gurus, they have a range of a 40 to 70 cent. That's what they've come out with in the last couple of days. It'll increase prices by 40 to 70 cents. I've been saying 50 cents as an estimate from the beginning. So, yeah, because it's going to be different in different places. How might Trump use the Defense Production Act with regard to oil and gas? Will the oil companies fight this in court? Absolutely they will fight it because there's no emergency. Yeah. And honestly, I don't think he's even going to try to use it. Yes, he put it in the executive order. I think the Defense Production Act is going to be used in a different way. I don't think he's going to try to force oil companies to drill. I think he's going to try to force through projects that companies are trying to, pipelines, LNG terminals. I think he's going to try to fast track and force all that through as fast as possible using the Defense Production Act. I don't think he's actually going to use it to try to force a company to build a refinery or force a company to build a well or drill wells. I think he's going to use it in a different way if he uses it. New subscriber from TikTok, most honest content I've seen. Thank you. So many people from Canada have been reaching out to me. Like, it's kind of crazy. My content and my direct messages is completely full of Canadian flags on TikTok. I don't know what happened with people in Canada, but they really like me. Why does the majority of the country think the U.S. isn't energy independent? That's because politicians and the media have been telling them that they're not. And for whatever reason, even though we can all agree that all politicians lie, it's so weird. We all agree they lie, but then everyone still believes what they say. Like that makes no sense. That makes no sense. Like someone will sit there and say, yes, politicians lie. And then a politician will say something and they'll say, yeah, that's right. It makes no sense. I don't get it. But that's why they believe that. Did he do the tariffs? Tariffs are implemented, but he is waiting on oil and gas, is what I understand. And it changes. That's the weird thing about this tariff thing. It's changing every couple of hours. Like, you can't keep up. And that's because he doesn't know what he's doing. And so it's my understanding that as of today, the tariffs are in place with the exception of oil and gas. And he's going to wait a couple, 3 weeks to decide. It's all bargaining and negotiation and bluster, and it's a bunch of crap is what it is. What he doesn't realize, though, is even if you don't place tariffs on oil and gas, just by placing the other tariffs on Canada and Mexico, that'll make energy prices increase. Even without tariffs on oil and gas, that will make energy prices increase. And he doesn't get that. I think that's a big thing no one is, too many people are missing, is that even if he doesn't put tariffs on oil and gas, the tariffs he's going to implement will cause energy prices to increase. This global economy that we exist in, and not even global, just look at, the Americas, look at Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Just look at that economy right there. That economy is built and run by corporations who trade freely across borders, and it is all set up to run. It's a profit-driven setup, and it's set up and built to run by thousands of companies, and it runs as efficiently as it possibly can. When you start fucking with that, it disrupts the flow of goods. And so then what happens is people start getting goods and services from other places that's less efficient. Basically, we're going to use more energy by placing tariffs on things that aren't even related to energy, and that will kind of in a backdoor way, cause energy prices to rise. Even if they don't put tariffs on energy, it'll still cause energy prices to rise because the economy in these three countries will be disrupted, and it will cause us to lose efficiencies and synergies that we have, and it will cause us to consume more energy trying to keep up, if that makes any sense. And oil was up like, I don't know, was it $1.50 yesterday or something? So, and that's why. That's why. Is OPEC going to cave to Trump? I do not believe for a second that OPEC is going to cave to Trump. I just don't. Hello, Wiley. How are you? Good to see you, Wiley. Do I have any pumpkins? No, I don't have any pumpkins. Trying to keep up with the question here. Trump got his press secretary to say Jesus did fine without electricity. I didn't see that. I can't confirm that. I'm just reading the comments. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying I can't confirm it. Politicians lie, but not my politician. That's what they say. Yeah, that's what they say, pretty much. Do you think he will do tariffs and then just grant exceptions like he did last time for American car companies in Mexico? I think that is likely, that there's going to be quite a few exceptions. But like I said, he's so unpredictable, it's hard to tell. But I do think, if I was a betting person, I would think there will be exceptions. Excuse me, sir, why are you in your car? I've always had a mistrust of people that stream in their car or have that tiny microphone. I'm in my car because there's a lot of people at my home, and the sound quality in my office is horrible. There's a terrible echo. So what I do is I get in my F-150. I don't have a car, I have a pickup. And I drive to this park near where I live, and I sit here and I look at the ponds and the ducks, and I look at the beautiful things in the park, and I do lives and make content because it's just a peaceful place to go that's quiet. If that makes you mistrust me, then you got trust issues. I don't know what to tell you. Where is Jilly? I don't know. Do you believe Trudeau will flip the switch and cut off electrical power to those regions in the U.S.? No, I don't believe that for a second. No, they won't. It's already raised gas prices in Colorado $2.49 to $2.99. You can't look at short-term gas price fluctuations and attribute it to these things. So I like to kind of wait a while and see, because, gas prices can be fairly volatile and they can jump in local areas, 30, 40, 50 cents literally overnight. And they're very volatile. So I tend to wait and see, look at longer term trends, even if it's a couple of weeks, before I try to attribute something to gas prices. The fact that Trump said last night there was nothing they could do to change his mind or stop the tariffs kind of says a lot. It does. Well, I mean, he's going to implement tariffs. I think the question is, will he decide to go through with oil and gas? And if he does, at what percentage? Because they likely won't be, I'm going to put that down. They likely won't be, if he does implement tariffs on oil and gas, it likely won't be as high as the tariffs on other things. But we'll just have to see. He created the new trade agreement, so he is admitting. Yeah, it's kind of strange. He did talk about how great the USMCA was, and now he's just violating essentially every portion of it. But that, he has a history of that. It's just like not paying your contractors, not honoring your agreements. He's not honoring his own trade agreements. Mr. Global, are you on Blue Sky? I found an account with your name and picture, but I don't know if it's legit. I am on Blue Sky, and there are some fakes on there. Just my name is identical on Blue Sky as it is on other apps, and as far as I know, I'm always the one with the most followers. So I think I don't have a ton of followers on Blue Sky. It's close to 15,000, somewhere high 14s, close to 15,000. That's me. Do you know the percentage of oil we get from Canada? Wondering if it will affect us through. Yeah, Canada's, of the oil we import, the most of it comes from Canada. I believe it's was it 52% or something like that? A lot of people say 60%, but I think it's 54% of our imports come from Canada. Canada's number one, Mexico's number two. But no, that won't change his mind. Yeah. The Amish have survived without electricity. Well, I mean, you have a point. We could survive. It would just take longer to get to work, It would just take longer to get to work. Thank you, Hector. Why doesn't Canada refine and import their own oil? So first of all, Canada does have refineries. Here's the thing. Canada produces a lot more oil than they need to use for their refined fuel consumption. And if they were to build more refineries and refine more of their oil, they would just then have to export that. And so, in addition to that, a lot of the oil companies in Canada own a large interest in the companies that are buying their oil in the United States. So, in a way, when Canada exports oil to the United States, it's literally the Canadian oil companies selling the oil to themselves largely. They don't own the entire, they don't own 100% of the refineries and everything, but they do own a huge piece of them. They are principal owners. They're one of the owners of all the places they sell it to. So they're basically selling it to themselves in another country, refining it, right? So there's no, a lot of people are saying that Canada needs to build more refineries. They really don't. They don't need more refineries. What they need is more ways to get their product out of the country. That's what they really need. If there was a huge demand for more refineries in Canada, the companies that exist there would build them. They would. Like if it was a huge profit center and if they could build them without, fighting all the regulations and lawsuits, of course, I understand that's a thing. But the point is, in a way, they're selling that oil to themselves in another country. As bad as the Canadian government claims Canadian oil producers have it, if it was that bad, they wouldn't be such a large producer of oil. But they do need to loosen up some of the regulations regarding how they get the oil out of the country to increase the price of that oil. If I bring my child from Mexico, will there be a 25% tariff on my kid? Not unless you try to sell them. I don't think so. Is Canada going to retaliate? Yes, I'm sure they are. Hello, Scott in Peoria. Will Canada become the 51st state? No, they will not. They will not become the 51st state. As a Canadian truck driver in the U.S., I'm scared shitless based on our population discrepancy is a trade deficit not to be expected. Why is Trump initiating the trade? Inflating the trade deficit. That's true. There's just going to be a trade deficit there because of the differences in population and needs of each country. There's no getting around the trade deficit. The way the trade deficit should be looked at is this is, the size of our country, and this is the size of Canada, and this is the trade deficit. And does that correlate? Does that correlate to where it should be based on size? And he's not looking at that. He's just saying there's a trade deficit. Well, of course there's a trade deficit. Of course, we have a trade deficit with a lot of countries. So, will companies raise prices in anticipation that tariffs are coming? I would say some will definitely. I do know companies have been buying as much merch as possible leading up to. They've been filling up their inventories. They've been ordering a lot of extra stuff. So there's been a lot of purchasing going on. increased purchasing going on prior to the tariffs taking place in order for those companies to save that money, which is only proof that the tariffs do actually get paid by the Americans. Is there much available capacity in the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline for Canada to divert exports from the northern states? That changes day to day, but it is my understanding that that pipeline is running at near full capacity. That's my understanding. Donald Trump says America will be rich. You're just talking about the tariffs. You know, we have a $36 trillion deficit. And the idea that imposing some tariffs on some smaller nations is going to make us rich while we have a $36 trillion deficit is maybe the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. It's not enough money. Like, and you're literally just taking money out of the Americans that already live here. You're taking money out of our pockets and transferring it to the government's pockets. That doesn't make us rich. That does not make us rich. You're just taking money out of one pocket and moving it to another pocket. Doesn't make us rich. None of that money comes from Canada. None of that money comes from Mexico. This is just redistributing money that is still in circulation and existing within the United States. That doesn't make us rich. That's not a thing. That doesn't make us rich. Do oil refineries specialize in products, or do they produce all oil byproducts? So it depends on the refinery. So some refineries can do anything. And there is one misconception that if a refinery is built to process like heavy crude from Canada, then that's all it can do and that it can't refine US oil. That's not true at all. A refinery that can refine and process Canadian oil can refine and process any oil. Our oil, their oil, Mexico's oil, doesn't matter. The only refining that is limited is refineries that can't refine heavy sour crude. Those are the only ones that are limited. If a refinery is set up to refine heavy sour crude, it can then refine any kind of crude. It just can. Refining light, sweet crude, the American-made, American-produced oil is much simpler and easier than refining Canadian oil. The refiners that refine Canadian oil can refine our oil too. It's just easier. But they've made these investments in the equipment and infrastructure needed to refine that oil. And it's better for them to use that. So, do you think they will drill in Anwr? I do not. I do not think for a second that they will drill in Anwr. I can say all 5 of the big oil companies have already said, we're not touching Anwr. And in order to go to Anwr and drill, it takes a massive investment. You're looking at, like, you're not going to go up there and drill one well. Like, that's not really a thing. So in order to go to Anwr, they would have to, shell out the money for all these leases. And to be profitable in Anwr, you have to make a huge investment. You have to drill a ton of wells because you need all of these wells to produce all of this oil to pay for all of the infrastructure you have to build. And if you compare that to like the Willow project, they would not go unless they could drill at least 250 wells. And that's what they ended up negotiating with the Biden administration, was that they would drill 250 wells. If they had to drill any less than that, they were out. They were not going to go. Because once you go up there and build all that infrastructure, you have to have enough wells, you have to produce enough resources to pay for your total investment. You're talking about probably around $10 billion to go to Anwr. And the oil in Anwr is unproven. You know, the Willow project is in the National Petroleum Reserve, which is southwest of Prudhoe Bay. The oil reserves in that area are 100% proven. They know the oil's there. They just have to drill and get it. That's not the case in Anwr. They think there's oil there. And, you know, the Geological Society says that they believe there's oil there, but that's not proven. Someone believing something isn't enough for another someone to write a $10 billion check. To get someone to write a $10 billion check, you got to know it's there, right? We don't know that it's there. And so nobody wants to go to Anwr, and any companies that would don't have the money. They don't have the money and the resources to develop it and to be profitable. So I don't believe there's going to be any drilling in Anwr. Most of your medications are made from petrochemical engineering as well. That's absolutely true. Let me... Wow, thank you so much for that. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. My F-150 is like my office. My brain works better in there. Yes, mine too. My F-150, this is my office. Brenda Wesley, I don't have my glasses on. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Do the Amish have running water? I don't know. I think so. I think so. I'm not an expert on the Amish. You know, I probably know about as much about them as anyone else, or maybe even not as much as other people. Like, you know. Watching you from Calgary. Thank you. Canada can still sell it to someone else. Yes, you know, but the problem is they can't sell enough of it. They don't have, you know, one of the things that are required to sustain a commodity is the marketability of it. And what falls under the marketability of it is the ability to, you know, move it to your buyer and to deliver it. And that's where Canada is extremely limited. And right now, basically, the only way for Canada to get their oil out of the country that does not go into the United States is the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And I believe that's 900,000 barrels a day. You know, what, maybe somewhere around 20% of their total production. It's I don't even think it's 20%, maybe 18% of their total production. So that means the rest of it's forced to go through the United States. So dinosaur fossils and oil are not in the same strata. Well, that's, yeah, that's because oil didn't come from dinosaurs. My gravitational pull is stronger than the moon. Wow, thank you. Sean Garner, thank you so much for the $5. Was I banned from Twitter? No, I actually just closed my Twitter account. I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. Christina Smallhorn, thank you so much. I know you're an oil guy, but can you explain how Tariffs could affect housing prices. Yeah, it's gonna make them increase even more. If you go back to 2019 and you look at lumber prices in the United States, they went up. And they went up a lot. And they went up because we put tariffs on Canadian lumber. And when lumber prices go up, your new home construction falls. And when new home construction falls, housing prices go up. That's why housing prices are so high right now. There's a couple of things that have contributed to housing prices. One, tariffs on lumber that have gone back to 2019, to COVID, which stopped a ton of new housing starts and just put a screeching halt to a lot of construction. All of that has led up to the shortage in housing we have today. So implementing additional tariffs on Canadian lumber, Donald Trump says, we don't need Canada's lumber, we have our own. Okay, maybe that's true, but there's different kinds of need. Sometimes you need things on the market just to keep other things cheaper. For instance, Donald Trump is asking OPEC to produce more oil. He's not asking them to send it to us because we don't need it. He's simply asking them to produce more so there's more on the total market, and that drives down the price of it. It's the same thing with Canadian lumber. So when he says we don't need Canadian lumber, that may be true, but to keep the price of it in a good place, we do need Canadian lumber. We need that lumber on the market to keep the prices down, right? So to put tariffs on Canadian lumber is completely antithetical to anything to do with driving down home prices in the United States. As a matter of fact, it's going to make it worse. It's going to make it worse. You can't cause lumber to be more expensive and expect home prices to fall unless we just stop building homes out of wood altogether. You know what I mean? Like, are we just gonna stop using wood? No, we're not. And anything we would use to substitute it would be more expensive than wood. So, yeah, it's definitely going to have an impact. Thank you so much. Can we refine our own oil? I get this question all the time. A lot of people believe we can't. We absolutely can. We absolutely can refine. We refine a little over 9 million barrels a day of did I say lumber? Can we refine our own oil? My brain's not working. Yes, we can refine our own oil. We refine over 9 million barrels a day of our own oil. We import oil for multiple reasons. One, refining is a standalone industry in itself. Just because we import a certain amount of oil, that doesn't mean that oil is for us and that we need it. If people are importing oil, it's because they're going to make money on it. They're going to do something with that, and then they're going to turn around and sell it. They're either going to refine it, or they're going to market it, or they're going to do something with it. They're going to flip it somehow. And so people have this notion that, what we import is because what we need and what we export. They think it's all based on our needs. None of it is based on our needs. It's based on the people that are importing it and exporting it, how much money they can make. It's a business in itself. How much oil we import, we could import twice as much oil tomorrow. That doesn't mean we need it. It means someone figured out how to way to make money importing twice as much oil, right? So, but yes, we can absolutely refine our own oil. But the reason we don't refine 100% of our own oil is because it's less profitable. We would make, and when I say we, I mean refiners in the United States, would make less money if they only refined our own oil. And your gas prices would be higher. We import cheaper oil for better profit margins for refiners and to keep gas prices lower in the United States. It's all about profit. So, everyone thinks that what we refine, what we import, what we export is all about America's needs. It's not. It's about profit. If someone can make a dollar importing more oil, we're going to import more oil. Doesn't matter whether we need it or not. They're going to make a dollar doing it. They're going to do it. That's how it works. And that's how people need to think about it, because that's what it is. Some of these remarks. Canada needs to get their oil from the west to the east, step one. That is true. If that would be in Canada's best interest, is to be able to get their oil, specifically from Alberta, to the east. Yes, that would be in Canada's best interest, for sure. What if we cut all aid to Canada? Are we sending aid to Canada? Is Canada in some situation where they need our aid? I'm not an aid expert. I don't know how much aid we're sending other countries. Or are you just saying that, right? You're just saying that, right? Great question here. If you were the energy secretary, what are a couple of things you would immediately do to lower, if not stabilize, gas prices in the United States? So the very first thing I would try to get done, and it would probably, I'm not an attorney, and so I don't have, all of the knowledge regarding what requires legislation and what doesn't. But the first thing I would push would be a policy that caps the export of refined fuels out of the United States. And it caps it based on the price of those fuels in the United States. So here's what I'm talking about. One of the reasons gas prices are about 50 cents a gallon higher than they should be right now. 3 years ago, it was because refining capacity was lost. We've gained a lot of that refining capacity back. But another thing that's hampering us right now is the amount of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel that we export. And we're exporting more and more. That's keeping the inventory of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel in the United States depressed, and it's keeping it lower. It's keeping it at the low end of the 5-year average. That keeps gas prices higher. So one of the things I would try to institute would be a trigger law that if the national average price of gasoline in the US hits a certain number, then that puts a cap on exports and it reduces the amount we can export until those prices come down. And once those prices come down to a level that is, written in the legislation and stays there for, say, 30 days, then that cap is lifted. And so that would be a trigger law that would impact refined fuel exports and try to keep more refined fuel inventories within the United States, which would drive down gas prices. It wouldn't have any effect on oil prices whatsoever. So it wouldn't affect, the idea that simply driving down oil prices is the best thing to do to drive down gas prices. That worked great in the 80s. But it's not the 80s. It's 2025. You need some new ideas. So, and just by having that law in place, you will likely never need to use it. Does that make sense? Because if exporters understand that that law exists, then they will just automatically trim back the amount they export. And you don't have to change the refined fuel exports by a large percentage to have a big impact on gas prices. You really don't. It's not a very small percentage change in inventory. Increasing that inventory by a few percentage points can reduce gas prices significantly. And that's the first and main thing that I would push if I became the energy secretary right there, is getting that passed, because that is a protective measure of for American citizens. It's something that will protect them from huge spikes, like when you see gas go to $4. That would put a stop to that. That would put a stop to that. The only way, if all of that was in place, the only way you would see huge spikes in gas prices if there was massive spikes in oil prices. You're talking oil would have to hit like a much higher number than it did previously. So instead of oil hitting $100 and that causing gas prices to be over $4, oil would have to hit like $130 for gas prices to hit $4. Does that make sense? So it puts a buffer in there. That's the first and most important thing I would do. And I actually presented that plan to Senator James Lankford in 2022. I reached out to him. I contacted him. One of his staffers got a hold of me, basically one of those, thank you for contacting your senator. And I said, I would like to send this plan to the senator. And they allowed me to send it. I sent it. And one night I'm driving home and he calls me. And like, it blew my mind because I expected it to be, when I saw the phone, the caller ID on the phone, I thought, I was some staffer or something. And I answered the phone. It's like 7 o'clock in the evening and it's him. He called me and he told me he loved the idea, and they had floated different versions of that idea around. And remember, this was when gas was $5 a gallon on a national average. But he appreciated me sending it. He said he really liked it. He liked the way I had constructed it and put it together. And but what happened was the OPEC 2020 deal ended and gas prices started falling. And as soon as gas prices started falling, we stopped worrying. Congress stopped worrying about that type of legislation, because that's how our government works. They're not proactive. They try to fix things after they happen instead of trying to fix them before they happen. So when gas prices started falling, they went below 4 and then they got down into 3s. They completely forgot about that stuff. I know you don't think OPEC will increase production, but how does the domestic oil industry mitigate for the possibilities? So the big oil players within the United States have already now announced reduced CapEx levels for 2025. So they were prepared for this before Donald Trump even took office. When Chevron comes out and says we're going to reduce our investments in the upstream sector, which is drilling, before Donald Trump has even taken office, that's a huge signal right there. Like, they already know what's about to happen. They already know he's going to ask OPEC. They're already making plans to reduce the amount of money they spend. And and Exxon's doing the same thing. Chevron is doing it. That's them hedging. That's another way for them to hedge their losses. Not that they will move into lost territory, but the amount of profit they are earning will decrease. This is a way for them to put a buffer on that and to lose less profit. I don't want to say incur more losses. I want to say incur less profit. So they they want to maintain as much profit as necessary. So they're already doing that. They're reducing investments. Private equity groups in the United States that fund, like energy portfolios, they're already backing off a little bit. So it's already occurring. The industry is preparing itself for it already, preemptively. Before Donald Trump even asked OPEC to increase production, they were already taking steps to mitigate the damage. Yeah, if you're in here, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get as many people over here as possible as I'm migrating away from other platforms I'm on. This is going to be my main platform. teach you about your 401k. You're on the wrong channel, man. You're on the wrong channel. I'm an oil and gas expert. I mean, I will have general discussions with people about things, but when it comes to things outside of what I know, when it comes to 401ks or all the other things people want to talk about with me, I don't feel like I have any special knowledge to offer. I feel like I have a knowledge base that is comparable to pretty much everyone else. Oil and gas is my thing. That's what I talk about. And I certainly don't want to talk about 401ks or investments and possibly cause somebody to make a bad decision with their 401ks or investments. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to give anyone the impression that I have some special knowledge regarding that when I don't. So I can tell you what I do with my 401k. I put my money in it and I leave it alone. That's, you know, that's what I do. I just forget about it. So isn't it likely that some prices will increase more than the amount of the tariff, as it is likely some companies will adjust prices to maintain their margins? Isn't it likely that some prices will increase more than the amount of the tariff? It's possible. Yeah. I had to read that a couple of times. As it is likely some companies will adjust prices to maintain their margins. Yeah. It's going to be, you know, different companies have different needs, different corporate structures, different ways to make money. So it's going to be different across industries and especially across businesses. So those companies will make those decisions. It's, you know, some of those companies will actually absorb some of those losses to maintain sales, and some of them won't. If the product they sell, if the demand for the product they sell is very inelastic, or let's say the demand is so strong that the price doesn't have a huge impact on the demand, then those are the companies that will do just, they'll at the very least implement the full cost of the tariffs, if not more. But the more elasticity a product has in it in regards to price, the more the industry and the companies will absorb the tariff. So it really depends on the product and the demand of it and the elasticity of the demand of it. Any good books on the oil and gas industry you'd recommend? The Prize. There's a ton of books out there on the oil and gas industry. I haven't read a lot of them because I don't need to. But The Prize by Daniel Yergin. It's one of the, it is the best-selling oil and gas book ever, and I've listened to it a couple of times on Audible. But that's, if I had to recommend one, that's what I'd recommend. Tariffs make domestic producers more competitive compared to imports. That's the point of it. He skips that part. None of that applies when it comes to commodities. None of that ideology applies in the least little bit when it comes to commodities. That's the part you don't understand. That's the part you don't get. America can't just shit another 6 million barrels of oil a day. That's not a thing. We can't just shit all of the oil that we import from Canada. We can't just go produce that overnight or even over a period of years. That's not a thing. And if you think we can, you are completely lost on this subject and have no business talking about it. The amount you're talking about that we would have to increase oil production is the amount that we have increased production over what? The last 16 years or something like that. So what you're saying is basically in the next year, we would have to increase production as much as we have since 2009. That's not a thing. That is not a thing that can even happen. If every single drilling rig that exists in the United States was running 24/7, 365, we would not come anywhere close to that. It's not a thing that's going to happen. Thank you, Brenda Wesley. Thank you so much. This guy thinks Biden did a great job. I have never once in my life said Joe Biden did a great job. You just can't handle the fact that I'm critical of Donald Trump. You just can't deal with that. You're probably laying on the floor in the fetal position, crying like a little bitch right now. I have pointed out every one of Joe Biden's problems with his energy policy, and I do it for Donald Trump too. That's why people follow me, because they know I'll give them an honest answer. They know I don't care if it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Your Trump daddy issues are not my fucking problem. You understand? Your Trump daddy issues are not my fucking problem. That's a you problem, not a me problem. Thank you so much, Tweety. Thank you. Thank you, Kentley. I've never had people give me stuff on here. Thank you guys so much. I'm your favorite. Thank you, Tracy. As an average conservative Canadian, I hope this terrific stuff is over quick and our government changes. Has Mideast oil production reduced over the years? There's only so much oil underground. Yes, it's reduced quite a bit. So currently, OPEC is producing about 3.5 million barrels a day less than they were under the Trump administration. So what they've been doing is, as the United States increases production and as Canada increases production, they just keep cutting production to keep the prices high. So yeah, their production has declined. They were at 34, 35 million barrels a day. Not OPEC and OPEC plus. I'm just talking about OPEC. They were at around 34 and a half, 35 million barrels a day under the Trump administration. I think they're around 30 right now, maybe 31. So they just keep cutting production as we increase. They can't do that forever. So I expect oil production in the United States in 2025 and 2026. I don't expect it to grow very much at all. I expect the growth of it to be kind of flat. We might increase production by maybe 300,000 barrels a day or something over the year. But that's just keeping up with the growth in global demand. So we're not going to see big production increases in the United States over the next few years, because what U.S. producers fear is that if they increase production too much and they increase production much faster than global demand is growing, then OPEC will say, okay, you've stolen enough of our market share. We're going to flood the market again and shut you guys down and try to put you out of business. They've done it twice before. The fear is they will try it again. So even in 2024, production increase was relatively flat compared to what it was in 2023. And I predicted that would happen, and that did happen. We increased production significantly more in 2023 than we did in 2024. And that's because we've reached that number where U.S. producers are like, okay, we're kind of pushing the envelope here with OPEC. We don't want to overproduce and piss them off because we can't win a war. We can't win an oil price war with OPEC. That's not a thing. The United States has companies that run on profit. They have businesses, and they're competing with nation states. And that makes it almost impossible. And so when you're in this business, you have to be very careful about what you do. Because if you get into a price war with nation states, you're going to lose. You're going to lose every time. U.S. oil companies cannot compete with 14 nation states that are a cartel that work together to control, global oil production. They can't compete with that. They can't. So they're going to do everything they can to not piss them off and cause a price war. No, I left Twitter because it's a shitty app. It's a terrible app. And all I did was go there and post stuff and leave. I didn't stay to look at any of the content because Twitter is like the modern day version of the National Enquirer. I didn't read the National Enquirer before the internet came out. I didn't read that either. So why the hell would I read Twitter? It's basically a media tabloid is what it is. I don't need to read about people being abducted by aliens. That's not a thing. I don't need to read all the dumbass conspiracy theories that people, whether it's on the right or the left, I don't care, that they come up with. I have no interest in becoming dumber. I have no interest in becoming dumber by reading shit written by really dumb people. That's why I left Twitter. That's why I left Twitter. Yeah. Sorry. It's not that complicated. And it's also why I don't put a lot of effort, additionally, into Blue Sky, because I signed up for Blue Sky at the request of a very important person that asked me to get on Blue Sky because I was refusing to get on there. So I did so at the request of someone else. And, I'm not a big fan of Blue Sky either. And a lot of people on Blue Sky don't like me because I'm not a leftist. I've gotten a lot of hate on Blue Sky for being an independent. So, yeah. What do I think of Elon Musk? The only thing I like, so with Elon Musk, it's like whatever. Like, I don't have any kind of opinions about Elon Musk, good or bad, but I don't like unelected billionaires getting to run functions of our government. Like that, I don't get that. And it doesn't matter if it's Elon Musk or somebody else. I don't pay a lot of attention to Elon Musk. And, I get asked all the time, why aren't you more critical of Elon Musk? And most of the time, the answer is because I think he's probably going to be gone in a few weeks and it doesn't matter. Elon Musk is going to be, he'll probably be there a little longer, but he'll end up being like one of those flashes in the pan with the new Trump administration. He'll be gone. He's not going to be around that long. He's going to make one mistake. He's going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. He's going to do something to piss Donald Trump off, because as much of sort of a Trump loyalist as he is, he also, has enough sort of his own sort of independence that he's going to eventually piss Donald Trump off and he'll be gone. So honestly, I just don't think he matters. And that's why I just don't really care about Elon Musk. I think he's going to be gone pretty soon. I would be shocked if he's still there in a month. I really would. Mr. Global and Harry Sisson work for Midas Touch. Actually, the Midas Touch hates my guts because I've called them out multiple times for misinformation. I certainly don't work for the Midas Touch. But since you brought it up, I do collaborate and work with a media organization called The Dispatch. Yeah, and you'd be shocked to know that it is a somewhat conservative media organization, but they're still grounded in their American principles. So they're more like 90s era conservatives, you know? And I think they are graded as like a center right type publication. But no, the Midas Touch does not like Mr. Global, my guy. And the fact that you would say I work for them is preposterous because they don't like me one bit. And the reason the Midas Touch doesn't like me is because they hired a bunch of influencers, a bunch of left-leaning influencers to represent them on social media. And, you know, I focus on oil and gas. That's what I focus on. So when these left-leaning influencers on social media started talking a lot about oil and gas and spreading a lot of misinformation under the umbrella of the Midas Touch, I started calling them out. And several of their creators that work under the Midas Touch sort of platform have blocked me. You know, they don't like me. I don't know why you're saying I work for the Midas Touch. That's the dumbest shit. And I don't even follow Harry Sisson. I don't know what you're talking about. Once again, you're still just so butthurt that I'm critical of your daddy that you got to run your mouth about me. You don't know dick about me. And you don't know dick about the oil and gas industry either. I don't know why you're on this live talking about it. You're dumber than a fucking post. Which was the best president in terms of energy costs for the population? So historically, the best president that we've had for energy in the United States was actually George Bush. It was George Bush's energy policies. And oh, by the way, we don't have energy policies anymore. That's not a thing. Back in the day, the president would come out, you know, typically within his first year in office, and they would write a really expansive and powerful and robust energy policy. And they would say, this is what we're going to do for the next 4 years. That doesn't really happen anymore. We do energy policy the same way we do our budgets. It's like a series of continuing resolutions, and nothing ever gets done, and nothing substantive ever happens. Now we do that with energy policy, but George Bush had the most impactful and comprehensive energy policy of my lifetime. And it set the stage for our energy independence. It set the stage for the vast expansion of oil and gas production in the United States. It set the stage for the vast expansion of renewables in the United States. It is the most comprehensive energy policy we've had in my lifetime, and it is directly where we are today can be attributed directly to George Bush's energy policy. 1,000%. And I've said that many times. As much as Midas Touch does not like you or your content, I think it makes sense for their viewers and their creators to understand all sides of it. That may be true, but the issue that I have with Midas Touch is when I called them out for their misinformation, they did not correct it. They refused to correct it. And I showed them it was misinformation repeatedly. And they not only did they refuse to correct it, the people that put out the misinformation blocked me. Okay? So, you know, you can love the Midas Touch because they're left-leaning and they tell you all the things they want to hear. They're no different. They're no different than a right-wing media organization. They're just telling a different group of people what that group of people wants to hear. And the fact that they would try to prevent people from exposing, and keep in mind, I don't like watch the Midas Touch and look for them to be spreading misinformation. This was shit that stumbled across my phone. I just happened to stumble across it. And the fact that they tried to prevent the truth about what they were reporting from coming out told me everything I needed to know about the Midas Touch. And I know people think they're great guys, whatever. I don't give a shit. You either have integrity in journalism or you don't. If you make a mistake, you own it and you retract it and you say, this is wrong and here's the truth. That's what journalists do. When they are exposed for being wrong, whether it was intentionally or whether it was by accident, there's only one thing you can do, and that's correct it. And they refused to correct it. And they insisted on continuing to spread a lie. And so that's the facts of the case. That is simply the facts of the case. So, yeah, they don't like me. And I'm not bashing Midas Touch. I'm just saying they're not any different than any other news organization. They're just another media outlet. They're not any different. I see people every day like, yeah, I quit watching mainstream media and now I watch, Aaron Parnas. Well, that's great, and I'm sure Aaron's a great guy. But when you're watching Aaron Parnas, he's reading to you what the mainstream media is saying. So what difference does it make if you're watching the mainstream media or Aaron Parnas? He's literally got his phone and his laptop and he's just reading you a story from CNN or MSNBC or whoever. Like, he is not a journalist. He's a reporter. He's reading what someone else wrote. So you're not getting different, better news because it's coming from someone else, because the source is the same source. The source is the same source. And there's only, there's one person on TikTok that I will actually watch their news, and that's the news girl. That's the news girl, Lisa Ree Millard. Because she actually does the research herself and she puts together a well thought out, comprehensive story and explains to you in great detail how whatever she's talking about is going to impact different people. She's not out here regurgitating what mainstream media already says. She's an actual journalist, and that's why I watch her. I don't need someone to read the news to me. I can read the news myself. So who's Fliston? I don't have my glasses on, so I can't. What's the outlook for increasing refining capacity over the next few years to a decade? It's not good. I don't think we're going to increase it. We have a refinery about to close in Houston. The Lyondale refinery, that's about to close. So that will be another loss of capacity. And we're going to have to make that capacity up somewhere. So I don't see really refining capacity increasing much at all, if any, in the next few years to a decade. I just don't. They're putting insects in our fast food. Who? My mod isn't here. Why is the refinery closing? It's a really old refinery, and it's old refineries are very expensive to run, and it's really hard to maintain any type of profit margin with an old, aging refinery, and they're just done. Like it's a really, I can't remember what year that damn refinery was built, but it's old. It's an old ass refinery. So that's right. Insects have more protein. That's 100% right. I heard a rumor that Canada is going to twin the TMX. So, for those of you that don't know, the TMX is the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Have I heard anything? I've only heard the rumors. So, I haven't heard anything from a source that I would say, okay, that's going to happen. Like, I've probably just heard the same rumors as you. That would be another unbelievably expensive project. But now that they have completed the Trans Mountain, it would be much easier for them to twin it, because they've been through it and they've completed it. And whenever you build a pipeline like that, that's a very long pipeline, running all the way to the West Coast, through very rough terrain, which made it very difficult. They learned a lot in that process, and so they can easily twin it and take all those learnings and complete that task much cheaper and much faster if they decide to go that route. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if they went ahead and did it. I would. If I was Canada, I would. Yes, there is bugs in cereal. There's bugs in everything. This has turned into a bug life, which is fine, which is totally fine. ICE took your neighbors. Well, um, don't know anything about that. What's happening with the new Oklahoma refinery? They're having land issues, and Southern Rock is kind of back to square one, looking for a place to build it again. Do people in the oil industry in Canada and the US get along? I've always gotten along with everyone I ever worked with from Canada, and that's been my experience. These people work together a lot, and I've worked with a ton of people from Canada, and I've never seen any issues. yeah, they get along. We're all in the same industry. We're all there for the same reason. Yeah, they get along fine. Who pays to decommission old wells? So the way this works is an oil company must put up a bond when they drill a new well or if they acquire a new well. And you can purchase a blanket bond as well. So you can purchase a bond that covers a whole bunch of wells. That's what I have. So when I acquire wells, those go under my existing bond. And the bonds are designed to pay for the plugging and abandonment or decommissioning of the wells, um, if the oil company cannot do so. The problem with the bonds is they don't collect enough revenue to actually pay for it. Like, it's not even close. So um, the way it's supposed to work is the whoever is the current operator of that well, whoever is on file as being the operator of the well, and understand something: the operator is not necessarily the owner. Um, there are companies that operate wells that they don't have any interest in whatsoever. And you can drive up to that location and you can see a sign with an oil company's name on it. They may not own any interest in that well at all. They're an operator. They are managing the well. Now, the vast majority of the time, the operator of the well also owns the controlling interest of the well, but that's not always the case. They can own none of it, or they can own 1% of it. The point is, whoever the operator is responsible for plugging and abandoning the well. And they are responsible for billing all of the other interest owners for their portion of the decommissioning of that well. So if some oil company owns 10% of a well, then they have to pay for 10% of the decommissioning. Does that make sense? So the cost for that decommissioning is incumbent on the owners of the well. And it is the responsibility of the operator to ensure that it's done properly. And if it is not done properly, that is the full responsibility of the operator and not the other owners, because the operator is in charge of the activities and everything that happens on that location. So if an operator decommissioned a well and did not do it properly, and say there was 8 owners of that well and they all paid their portions to decommission it, and then they failed and they did it wrong, they would be solely responsible for paying for it to be fixed. The other owners, interest owners in the well, would not be responsible for that because they're not responsible for the operations of the well. Once it's plugged, they're done, right? So that's how that works. And quite often, companies go bankrupt, companies disappear, and wells are left behind that nobody owns. Um, Companies are often protected by limited liability by LLC laws that protect them from such things. And in those cases, you have orphaned wells, the government usually steps in, or some nonprofit organizations that raise money to do so, or they step in, and the taxpayers end up paying for the plugging of wells. There's a ton of money in the Inflation Reduction Act to pay for the decommissioning and plugging and abandonment of orphaned wells. There's tens of billions of dollars was in the Inflation Reduction Act just to do that. And so, but the operators are supposed to be responsible for it. Do operators go broke much? So here's how this typically happens. So let's say you have a big oil company. Let's say you have Chevron, right? And they drill a bunch of wells. Once they get their return on investment on those wells, and once they make, you see, every well has a liability attached to it, and that is the decommissioning of it or the plugging and abandonment of it. So at some point, if you're the operator or owner of a well, you're going to have to plug it. So what the big companies do is they basically, unless they need to keep old wells to maintain leases, they will sell off their low producing and older wells to small companies. They will sell those off to get rid of that liability. If you have, let's say you have 1,000 wells and it's going to cost $40,000 a piece to decommission those wells, then you have a $40 million liability, right? And the easiest way to get rid of that $40 million liability is to let someone else have those wells. And they will sell those wells very cheaply because they're getting the $40 million in liabilities wiped off their books. So, and so they will get rid of those wells. And then whoever they sell them to, or even just give them to, I've had a lot of wells just given to me for the liability of it. And then typically that operator will produce them long enough to make their money, and then they'll do the same thing. Old wells always end up in the hands of a company that can't afford to plug it. That happens way too often. They end up in the hands of a very small mom and pop company that can't withstand the volatility of the market. And those wells end up becoming orphaned. So, and that happens quite a bit. And then there's other companies. This is sort of a scam that happens in the industry. People will stand up companies to go out and acquire wells. And they never intend for the wells to produce anything. That's not where they're going to make their money. They will acquire these old wells for the liability of it, and they will basically scavenge everything they can off of the well site. So if there's production tanks, if there's a pumping unit, if there's separators, if there's tubing and casing and pipe in the well, all of these things, they will scavenge all of that stuff they can. They will sell it, and they'll make money selling all that stuff. And once they do that with all those wells, they basically dissolve their company and file bankruptcy. And so they took the wells just to scavenge them, and then they dissolved their company so they weren't responsible for the liability of it. And that's sort of a scam that happens a lot in the industry. And I've run into a couple of these companies that do this, and it's a problem in the United States. We hear that the government pays a lot in subsidies to the oil industry. How true is that? That's a great question. Subsidies in the oil and gas industry. So what we call subsidies in the oil and gas industry is called tax credits or tax deductions in every other industry. So I own an oil and gas company, and I invest and spend a certain amount of money into my business to produce oil and gas. I get a tax deduction for that money that I invest, right? If I own a grocery store and I spend money and invest money into my business to expand it, to improve it somehow, as a grocery store owner, I get a tax deduction for that. The tax deductions that oil companies get for investing in keeping oil in new wells or keeping old wells producing is what they're attributing as subsidies. They're tax deductions, and those tax deductions are greater than normal tax deductions that a normal business would get. The reason those tax deductions are greater is because there's an extremely elevated amount of risk involved in investing that money. That's the thing about the oil and gas industry, is your investment is at the highest risk it can possibly be, because you can lose 100% of it. But also the potential return on that investment is also outrageous. By far the single largest, what they classify as an oil and gas subsidy, is the money that is paid out to people for like heating assistance. So people that cannot afford their heat to heat their homes, there's a heating assistance program the federal government has, and they pay out billions of dollars a year to help people basically keep the heat on in their homes. That's classified as an oil and gas industry subsidy. And the reason they won't get rid of oil and gas subsidies, as they call them, is because by far the largest oil and gas subsidy doesn't go to oil and gas companies. It goes to people that can't afford to pay their bills, pay their heating bills. That's the largest oil and gas subsidy there is. And so to compare, and I'm talking about the United States, it's different in Canada. So to compare, say, oil and gas subsidies, as we call them, to like renewable energy, the renewable energy subsidies are roughly 8 times greater than oil and gas subsidies, because renewable subsidies are production tax credits. And what that means is not only do you get a tax deduction for, constructing the renewable power based system that you're building, you also get an ongoing tax credit for that energy that you produce. U.S. oil and gas companies don't get tax credits for the energy they produce. They get tax credits for the investments they make to produce energy. Renewable industry gets tax credits for their investment in the energy, and they also get tax credits for all the energy they sell. And that means the subsidies for renewables is much, I think it's 8 times, it's probably larger now, but it's about 8 times larger than the total subsidies for the oil and gas industry. But no, there's not a subsidy. There's no scenario where the federal government is writing checks to oil companies. Like that type of subsidy, that's not a thing. We're talking about tax deductions and tax credits. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So the same way SNAP is a USDA managed benefit. Correct. Yeah. I think most of the hate goes towards subsidies that go towards large oil companies. And I understand that. And what a lot of people don't understand is how much money the oil and gas industry puts back into the U.S. Treasury. Any tax deductions or subsidies, if you want to call them that benefit the oil and gas industry, are paid for more than 10 times over by the amount of revenue, tax revenue generated by that industry itself. I think it's up to about $170 billion a year is the amount of money that flows into the U.S. Treasury from oil and gas operations in the United States. So if oil and gas companies in the United States get 20 billion, say it's $20 billion a year in subsidies, and keep in mind the vast majority of that $20 billion is for heating assistance, doesn't actually go to oil companies, it goes to people. That investment is returned by $170 billion flowing into the U.S. Treasury from oil and gas receipts, from royalties on federal land and all that things. So the tax deductions or subsidies that the oil and gas industry receives, the government considers those things investments. They're getting a huge return on their investment through the oil and gas industry. Other industries that are heavily subsidized, much more than the oil and gas industry, don't put near as much money back into the U.S. Treasury. They just don't, because the business model isn't there. The business isn't designed for the government to make a bunch of money off of it. When you think about every gallon of gas is taxed, every gallon of oil is taxed, every gallon of everything in the oil and gas industry is taxed at every point along the supply chain. And that is a huge amount of money that goes to the states and also goes to the US Treasury, the federal government. So I can't really say how much it would impact the industry if those tax deductions went away. It would probably be a lot more harmful for small operators than it would the big ones. The big ones would be fine. They would just keep operating. They make billions and billions of dollars a year. So, they're not going to be harmed that much by those tax deductions. But the small operators really depend on those tax deductions because you literally have people out here, like risking their life savings to go start it and try to build a company. And so, but yeah, that's basically the rundown with subsidies for the oil and gas industry. Do the subsidies promote exploration that wouldn't happen? Sometimes. So if you look at like the Permian Basin, right? The Permian Basin is the most prolific oil field in the industry, right? The subsidies don't promote any of the activity in the Permian Basin. They just don't. They're going to be there drilling and pumping oil like crazy, whether those subsidies exist or not. Now, if you look at places outside, like if you look at new discoveries and companies saying, we're going to go drill in this area, we think there may be something there, situations like that, that's where the subsidies apply. Mostly looking for new fields, looking for new large reservoirs. That's where the subsidies really incentivize companies to look elsewhere. But once they're in a field that is a mass producer, the subsidies don't matter because they're going to drill and produce no matter what. So that's a great question. So the subsidies do have more of an impact in areas where it's still questionable how economically viable it is to drill and produce oil in those areas. Does that make sense? Is it true that Canada just cut off their oil and gas coming to the U.S.? Not unless it happened during this live, because I haven't heard anything about that. And I would be shocked if that did happen. So Alucia says, that's what I think most people would think is reasonable. I think it's mostly the big companies because of their profit and perceptions of gasoline pricing. Thank you for that answer. That's another important thing. 99% of oil companies don't sell a gallon of gas. Only your largest fully integrated companies actually sell gas. The vast majority of oil and gas producers in the United States are not the big companies. 99% of them you've never heard of. You only hear of the big companies, like the 5 big companies. You hear of Exxon, you hear of Chevron, you hear of these big companies. Those companies do sell gas, but 99% of oil companies don't, right? So when people are blaming oil companies for gas prices, you got to keep in mind that 99% of oil companies don't sell gas at all. And also keep in mind that it's a commodity. Gasoline is a commodity just like oil is, and whoever is selling it doesn't get to set the price of it. It's based on what the market will bear on any given day. So I have a small oil and gas company. I've never sold a gallon of gasoline in my life. I mostly am in natural gas. 70% of my production is natural gas, and the rest is oil. But never sold a gallon of gas in my life. So Hello, Diane. Thank you, Ellen Frank. Any opinion on the Haynesville and energy field in Louisiana? I do actually have an opinion on the Haynesville because, moving forward, um, you know, next year, 5 years, 10 years, natural gas is going to be a larger and larger and larger part of the total energy portfolio in the United States. And natural gas demand is starting to grow faster than any time in history. And that is expected to continue. Typically an average year demand for natural gas increases like somewhere between 1 and 2%, like globally. Um, that's about to, I think last year it hit like 4%. Now, that may not sound like a huge number, but that's a massive number. That is if you think about an annual 4% growth of a commodity, that is almost frightening because can you keep up with the demand? That is huge. So demand growth for natural gas around the world is taking off. We have nearly 1 billion people on the planet that don't have access to electricity. So we're working towards that. And then when you add in all of the data centers and AI and all that stuff, and don't get caught up in the deep seek bullshit about how it's going to, dampen future energy demand because they're lying about that. I've personally downloaded and used DeepSeek. It couldn't tell me anything I asked it. Like I asked that thing like 7 different questions, and every time the answer was, I don't know. So I wasn't that impressed with it. And I think they're lying about how they got it. But regardless of DeepSeek, natural gas demand is going to grow. And as you know, the Haynesville is a huge natural gas producer. And also, the Haynesville has a ton of natural gas reserves left in it. My company has large to me, a rather large interest in the Haynesville. Have a joint operating agreement with Sabine Oil and Gas, and we own some acreage 50-50 in the Haynesville. And I'm pretty excited about it because the Haynesville is going to be popping again, is what I'm saying. Natural gas prices are going to, demand is going to continue to increase, and as such, prices will continue to increase. LNG exports are going to continue to increase. So everything that's happening in the natural gas space is putting upward pressure on not only demand for natural gas, but prices for natural gas. So if I was working in part of the industry that was heavily focused on natural gas production, I'd be feeling really good right now. You're in a good spot. Oil can be wishy-washy. OPEC could crash the market and all that stuff. That won't have any impact on natural gas. And if it did, it would only be good because lower oil production means lower natural gas production from oil wells, which would be good for gas prices and good for natural gas, for pure play natural gas operators. So the Haynesville is a good spot to be in right now. It may not feel that way at the moment, but it's a good spot to be looking forward, for sure. Hi, Amelia. On sea imported oil, can the price change while the ship is underway? No, it cannot. Once that uh, once that order has been made, it's just like buying a stock. Once it's bought, it's bought. So if it takes a week for you to get your oil delivered and oil goes up $5 a barrel in that week, no, you don't have to pay the extra $5 a barrel. You paid for it. That would be like ordering something from Amazon and being charged extra because the price went up in the couple of days it took them to ship it to you. Yeah, that's not a thing. So did you decide if you're going to apply for the press? Yes, I did apply for the press conference thing. Tell you right now, I'm not gonna get that. There's no way. They're gonna look at all my content. Yeah, it's a contract. Like when you purchase, oil, you've entered into a contract, a binding agreement, right? So no, the price doesn't change. There's my moderator. The moderator is here, everyone. Nerd says you will never be in the press room, no matter who the president is. You're probably right because I talk shit about both sides. If you do get a press pass, what question would you ask? I haven't decided because I just have so many, I think I would go with, why did Donald Trump tell Americans for 2 years we were going to drill, baby, drill, and on his third day in office beg OPEC for more oil production? Because not that we were going to drill, baby, drill, because we weren't, but one for surefire way to make sure we don't drill, baby, drill is to get OPEC to increase oil production. Like that would kill that immediately if it was a thing. And it's not a thing. But if it was a thing, it would kill it immediately. So that's what I would ask. I would ask, why did the president spend 2 years telling people we were going to drill, baby, drill, and then on his third day in office, ask OPEC to increase production? That's the question I would ask. Maybe he meant OPEC to drill, baby, drill. Yeah, OPEC. So OPEC has about 5 million barrels a day of spare capacity. And what that means is they have 5 million barrels a day of production that they can ramp up without doing any drilling at all. Yeah. But yeah, maybe that is what he meant. Maybe he meant OPEC could drill, baby, drill. The follow-up question is what you need to focus on. The answer to the first question will most likely be a lie. The follow-up question will come to me the second I hear the lie from the answer on the first question. And I'm really good at follow-up questions because, and I don't need to know. I don't need to even think about what the follow-up question will be because I will know it the instant they lie to me. Because as they are lying to me, I will already know the data, and it's all right here. How is OPEC able to put their wells on hold? My understanding is that if you put a well dormant, it could be done. I'm sure I'm missing something. So, a couple of things. First of all, it's a long-held belief by a lot of people in the industry that shutting in a well harms it. The only way shutting in a well harms that well is if there's other wells in the area that are producing that draw from the reserves of that well. So if there's nothing else drawing from that source rock that particular well is drilled into, then it does no harm to the well whatsoever. It does absolutely nothing. It keeps it in almost like a state, like homeostasis, like it keeps it in a perfect preserved state. Um, now, um, Saudi Arabia, when they reduce production, they're likely not completely shutting in a lot of wells. What they're probably actually doing is choking back a lot of wells and keeping them producing just at much lower rates. Yeah, they're probably just choking them back. But I'm sure there's some that they shut in, but for the most part, they're choking them back. But how much will tariffs increase gas prices? So I've been saying 50 cents for ever since this started. All of the analysts and Wall Street people who claim to be energy experts, because apparently working on Wall Street makes you an energy expert. They're all saying 40 to 70 cents. So I think it's about 50 cents. And the largest impact will be in the Midwest and upper Midwest. That's where prices will be impacted the most. How much storage does Saudi Arabia have? So that's actually a good question, because most people would think that a nation like Saudi Arabia would just have massive amounts of storage, but they really don't. And there's a couple of reasons they don't. One of the reasons they don't is that their oil is extremely easy to produce in very large amounts very quickly, right? And most of their oil is very shallow. It's not deep like ours is very deep and it's in tight rock. Most of their oil is in very shallow and it exists in very porous source rock. So they don't have a ton of storage, because all they have, their storage is basically their reserves. That's how they kind of view it. Now they do have storage, of course, but they're also a massive target. They're in the middle of the Middle East, and they're surrounded by nations that want to destroy them, specifically Iran. There's terrorists everywhere. So they haven't built a ton of above ground storage to just store oil in, because they're a huge target and it's a very high risk. And their oil is so easy to extract out of the ground, they just keep it in the ground. Whereas it's much more difficult to do that in the United States. It is much more difficult to do that. A lot of people, including the Trump administration during his last administration, have proposed closing down our strategic petroleum reserve and just using our reserves that are still in the ground as our storage. That doesn't work in the United States. It takes too long to get it out of the ground. You have to go drill a freaking well. You have to you're talking about, if we suddenly needed 1 million barrels a day of oil for some reason, it would take forever. It would take a very long time to increase our production by that much when we can just pull it out of the reserve. Saudi Arabia, if they need 1 million barrels a day, like really quickly, they can literally just open the tap. They don't even have to drill any more wells, because so much oil flows from their wells, from shallow pools that have collected. So it's geologically, it's vastly different in Saudi Arabia than it is in the United States. So it's not practical for them to have a ton of storage on the surface. There's no need for it. They can literally just open valves and get all the oil they want. So no, they don't have The Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the United States is the largest one in the world that we know of. So it's possible that maybe Russia or China or somebody that we're not an ally with has one that we don't know about. But as far as we know, ours is the largest one in the world. We do protect those wells. Yeah, we absolutely do. So our petroleum reserve is underground. We store petroleum. We store sweet and heavy crude in salt caverns. It's stored underground, but there's also a lot of tankage. We also have a ton of storage in here in Oklahoma. It's in Cushing. Yeah, we have a ton of storage capacity in Cushing. But the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, that's underground. A series of underground salt caverns. I think there's 7. There's 7 or 8 of them. Okay. Hasn't Cushing been emptier since Trans Mountain Pipeline went live? It's actually been emptier since the Midland Triangle went live. And so we've added a ton of additional pipeline capacity running straight from Midland to Corpus. And oil used to go, I don't know if you're familiar with the Midland Triangle, but it's basically the pipeline system that exists in West Texas. And the majority of oil used to travel from Midland to Cushing. And then from Cushing, it would either be stored and sold or tied in to a pipeline and then back down to the Gulf Coast. Now we've added, I believe, I can't remember the total capacity, but we've added additional pipelines. I believe it's 3 additional pipelines from the Midland Triangle directly to Corpus. And I think there's one to the Houston ship channel as well. So most of that oil from Midland is now being piped directly to the Gulf Coast instead of going by Cushing first. And that's the largest contributor to lower storage levels in Cushing is the Midland Triangle. It's your birthday. Well, happy birthday, Blake. Has gasoline demand fluctuated enough over time to affect prices, or is the price totally dependent on supply, which can be manipulated by producers? So gasoline demand in the United States is pretty steady. It has not, with the exception of COVID, it does not fluctuate that much. It peaks in the summer, it falls to its lowest in the middle of winter, and it's pretty steady year over year. And it's not rising, even though we have more cars on the road than ever. The cars we are putting on the road are more fuel efficient. The cars that are coming off the road are less fuel efficient. So even though we're adding, millions of new cars to the road in the United States, our overall demand for gasoline is not really increasing. So it's all about supply, and a lot of that supply is directly tied to how much, gasoline and refined fuels that we export. What is the likelihood that Canada retaliates with targeted tariffs against the United States? I would say the likelihood is 100%. If if we put tariffs on Canada, they're putting tariffs on us. They're just, you can bank on that one. It's going to happen. If we put tariffs on their oil, they're going to put tariffs on whatever energy sources they can. So yeah, it's totally going to happen. It's totally going to happen. 1,000%. What would our gas prices be if we stopped exporting? We would probably see a drop in gas prices of close to 50 cents a gallon on a national average. We wouldn't have to stop exporting completely. We just need to reduce exports. That would bring gas prices down to a balance point. If we stopped exporting gas completely, then the response to that would be to produce less gas. So it would have, stopping it completely would actually have a more harmful impact than just reducing it. Because if we stop it completely, they'll just produce less to keep the price elevated. But if you just trim the amount of exports and bring down the gas prices by a reasonable amount, then they won't significantly reduce their production of the gasoline to offset that. Does that make sense? Kangaroos cannot walk backwards. Really? Well, I bet they can turn around pretty quick, though. I mean, if you're fighting a kangaroo and you're thinking you're going to sneak up behind them, I'm pretty, because they can't walk backwards. I'm pretty sure they can turn around pretty fast and walk forwards. A kangaroo will kick your ass. I'm sure a kangaroo would kick my ass, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't fight it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just wouldn't it be worth an ass kicking just to be able to tell that story to people? I would take an ass whooping by a kangaroo just to be able to tell people that I got my ass whooped by a kangaroo. That's totally something I would do. I would do that in a heartbeat. Yeah. Sometimes it's worth it. It really is. Sometimes it's worth it. I, Kangaroos are giant mouse bodybuilders. Well, yeah. All right, folks. Well, I have to run and shut it down. I've hit my 2 hours. I appreciate everyone so much for joining the live. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. This is where my content is moving. TikTok is going away. That's the thing that's happening. So I'm going to jump off here real quick. I will be doing more lives on YouTube in the future. Please subscribe and follow. Thank you guys very much. And thank you to the ones who sent the gifts. Bye.